To start, just tell me a little bit about Acelero.
Okay, so Acelero is doing business as Acelero Learning and Shine Early Learning. We operate Head Start programs throughout the country, early Head Start as well, and we also provide training and technical assistance to other Head Start programs and early childhood programs. We also support entire states on their with their early child care providers.
Very
So
cool.
that
And
is
what's your role over there?
I'm Senior Director of Talent Acquisition, so I oversee the recruiting department for the network.
Okay, cool. And what's the makeup of that team? How many people?
We have 12 recruiters on the team, made up of senior recruiters, and recruiters on demand. That's kind of like our substitute teacher model
Sure.
of like we bring them in to ebb and flow with the volume of requisitions that we have. And we're looking to add coordinators as well.
Got it. And so your talent acquisition function then is completely separate from HR.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we created the shared services model back in 16 to pull it from it was housed in HR. Whoever can do talent acquisition, whoever can do recruiting does it. And then we obviously found out it's a whole full-time job. So we separated that out and created a shared services model.
Sure. And what was the catalyst for that switch? Was it just purely volume, like couldn't keep up with everything going on?
Yeah, I think it was optimizing the processes, lack of consistency, because again, we're throughout the network. So we have multiple delegates, multiple business units working on recruiting. So to implement a consistent process and just more time on recruiting would equal, better time to fill, management of openings, decrease the number of openings because an opening would affect our services, children and families. So a multitude of factors going into that decision.
Got it. Got it. Great points. So tell me about like the types of roles that you're recruiting for.
Yeah, so we operate like a big school system. And then so we have anywhere from cooks in the kitchen, substitute teachers, teachers in the classroom, to manning our education department, family services, health and nutrition. We support the whole child. So it's not just education, it's
Mm,
mental, physical, everything. And family services too. So we support the families. So, and then we have our executive team. So we go, we can support all the way up to the CEO, VP, senior director levels. We also have sales and marketing and communications, finance, legal, HR, everything that goes into running
sheesh.
a
Yeah, that's
large
a lot.
company.
That's a lot. So with the team that you have, do you have folks specialized in certain areas? Like, do you have a couple people focused just on educational roles versus executive?
It's a good question. So we're kind of evolving as we go. It started with a department of 3 recruiters just handling everything,
Yep.
doing full cycle everything. But now we're starting to specialize in, food services, family services, facilities, so that the recruiters can focus on education roles because that's where we serve the children and families, in the classroom. If we can't open a
Hmm.
classroom, we can't do what we're here to do.
Yep.
Um, so there's that, but then there's also executive level searches, management level searches. So right now our recruiters are handling management positions as they come. We're working on scaffolding that so that there is an executive recruiter, and then education, and we're looking to build in specialties so that we can have the recruiter focus in their area.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned that you have recruiters on demand. Is that because there's just some seasonality to your hiring?
There is. And then we also have growth, right? So we had an expansion in New Jersey of 100 new employees needed to support additional classrooms, which is a wonderful thing. We're serving more children and families, but that means a lot more staff. So we needed to bring in, additional recruiters for that. And then, of course, if there's turnover or additional services, and then just our day-to-day operations with a headcount of 1,500, just that
It's a
the
lot.
openings
Yeah,
available, right?
yeah, constant. And you guys have an interesting situation compared to like, a typical corporation, right? Because yeah, typical company, speed to hire is important because there's lost productivity by not having somebody in a seat. In your instance, the consequences are even bigger, right? Because if you, to your point, like if you don't have teachers, you can't open a classroom.
Right.
So there is some real time pressure there. So what types of challenges does that create for you guys?
Um, Lots of challenges in terms of what you just mentioned.
Hmm.
How we've been trying to mitigate that is working on our screening processing. So
Mm.
we're not taking up too much time screening, so that we're using texting or Spark Hire or Google Form questionnaires to get the screening done so that we can quickly move them forward to the hiring manager. It has, previous to these tools, it's created a bottleneck in terms of just the volume that a single recruiter could handle. And we also want to give that human touch. We care about our candidates. We want them to succeed here in
Hmm.
whatever capacity. It's not, and we don't just consider them for the job they applied for. We consider them for where could they make an impact with us. So we want to have those meaningful conversations. So it is a conflict among the team of like human touch versus these other tools, but finding the balance there.
Yeah, yeah, it's the constant dilemma of like speed, quality, candidate experience. Like you have to factor all these things in under the context of what the organization needs as well. Like you need people, you need them fast, or like operations can't continue. Like we said, like the consequences for you guys are much higher.
Right.
Um, and as far as hiring managers go, how many of those folks are you supporting? Because I have to imagine with all these different roles, you have to coordinate with, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of people.
Yeah, I mean, I would say dozens per
Okay,
business unit. So dozens
sure.
per business unit. Every manager that operates a center, all the directors of the service areas, we are managing many hiring managers.
Yeah, and that's obviously a challenge as well with a
Hmm.
team of, I believe you said 12 to coordinate
Hmm.
with all those different people across all those different roles. And then
Correct.
how do you guys collaborate with them like on the front end of the hiring process to make sure in order to move quickly, you obviously have to have a really good handle on what they're looking for because you're all about getting people in front of the hiring managers fast. So do you guys have some type of meeting or intake at the beginning?
Yeah, we typically have a strategy call or an intake call regarding what they're looking for beyond the job description, like what are the unsaid things, that you're looking
Yep.
for, or particular things for this role that you're looking for. We could require bilingual if, in order to support the population we're serving, that type of thing. For the constant positions that we normally have, like teacher, assistant teacher, family advocates, may not require an intake call because we're looking for that same profile
Yeah, it's
over and over
evergreen.
again.
Yep.
But when we have a new position, obviously we do a lot of work on, developing the job description and seeing what we're also working on scorecards that um, definitely define the outcomes of the role so that we can relay that to candidates and then also assess that in a measurable way throughout the interviewing process to reduce the bias in the process as well, which is one of our goals for the company as well.
Great. And so you've got all these different roles. Do you guys have a pretty standard hiring process or does it vary wildly from role to role?
I would say it varies by level. So with the
Okay.
higher volume positions, there's one, process. With the, there it could be more high touch, and certainly at the executive level, there's a lot more factors and processes within the protocol.
Sure. Okay. So take me through, let's say, high volume role. You're getting a lot of people applying. You've got to coordinate with multiple hiring managers. Can you just take me through what the stages of that process look like?
Sure. So we have applicants apply. The recruiter would go in. We have, 24 to 48 hours that a recruiter should be looking at new candidates to assess them. We also have credential verification. That's like another step in our organization that other organizations may not have to go through because you could
Sure.
provide your transcript or your diploma right away or your certification. Ours is more. We have to assess their qualifications. We actually have to count, for instance, their number of early childhood education courses that they have in their transcripts, which ones count for early childhood. So we have a bit more when it comes to that. So we would be asking for their qualifications. That takes time. Um, we may be doing like one of three things that I mentioned. So texting, Google form survey, or the Spark Hire video to get questions answered in order to make it easier on the recruiter to have maybe a 5 or 10 minute conversation versus the 15 to 30-minute conversation to save time. So once we have that screening process done, eligibility verification. We would then send them on to the hiring manager for review. The hiring manager reviews the candidate. They could then either set them up for an interview themselves, or the recruiting team sets them up. So again, that varies by hiring manager. And then interview is in person or virtual. And depending on the role, we could have a working session. So teachers, for instance, could do a demo lesson. A data specialist would have like a working exercise to do, that sort of, an executive would have a thought exercise or a presentation to do. And then we would have in-person interviews or virtual interviews, and then selection, and then we go on to offer.
Sure. Yeah. So really holistic process. And that's why it's so important for you guys to screen very, very well on the front end, because if you have, the wrong fit later in the process, that's not only a waste of a lot of people's time internally, but also of the candidates if they get to the end and it's like, this is just not a match. So I can see why you have to have a pretty strong vetting process early on. So when we talk about high volume, like what does that look like for you guys, just to give people a picture of like average number of applicants for a high volume role?
Well, it's changed. It's ebbed and flowed
Yeah.
throughout my career here. I've been here for 15 years, and during the pandemic, since the pandemic, so we could get so I consider a high volume role like teachers, assistant teachers, floaters, and I say high volume in that we have a lot of openings for that, or we always have openings for that. Not necessarily we always have a lot of candidates. And where we don't have a lot of candidates, we could have those more personal conversations. It's where we have the high volume. I would say high volume would be 30 candidates per requisition. Yep. And we have over 300 requisitions for the company. So that's our high volume.
Yeah. So significant. So it's a combination then. The volume that presents sometimes a challenge for you guys is a combination of just having a lot of jobs. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, for some of those jobs, having more applicants than you can speak, have very personal, lengthy conversations early on in the process if you want to be able to speak and hear from all the candidates that are qualified based on their credentials and based on their resume, their application, everything that was submitted to you guys.
Right. And those are the frequent openings. When we have high level positions, so VPs, SVP, chief, we could see anywhere from 200 to 600 applicants. Wow. Coming through. So that is where we utilize these screening tools to kind of just filter down a little bit before we dive in.
And have you seen an increase like since the pandemic in number of applicants per role? I know that's something we've seen internally. Maybe it's because we've got more like remote openings, but I feel like we've just seen such a spike as far as overall applicant flow from every single source.
We have not. Okay. And again, that might be an industry sure. situation, because we're in education, and I don't know if you're aware, but there is a national teacher shortage. So in education, obviously they need to be in the classroom, yep. And there's a lot of people that decided during the pandemic that's not for them anymore. So we do struggle with volume of candidates right now. And unless, like you said, it's remote, it's management, we used to put more weight on, okay, if a recruiter has a management level role, they should have less, that's harder, right? Well, now management level roles are easier to fill than our line staff. So we need more time and resources and effort into our line staffing than management staffing, because we get the candidates, they're dedicated, they're quick to respond. They do the assignments. They are more aligned with the salary, so sure. The struggle is in that in our frontline staff.
Got it. Okay. So it varies then depending on the role or the level. So in those scenarios in which it's a managerial or more executive level role, you're getting, let's call it a few hundred people applying. Are you taking them through a similar front end screening process?
Yeah, the screening process for them looks like a Google form mm-hmm. with a variety of questions, about 5 questions, and also the Spark Hire video that has 3 to 5 questions as well. So the Google form questions are more general, and then the Spark Hire questions are more specific and get into the priorities for the role. And where I went to the scorecard, we would have outcome-based questions on the Spark Hire video.
Got it. So the combination of all that information you're gathering then helps you build a more clear profile of who that candidate is, and then helps you make better decisions about whether or not they advance in the process.
Correct.
And are you finding a lot of those, like if you're getting a few hundred people applying, are a lot of those folks advancing to that step, or do you move everybody to that step? Like what's the threshold?
Yeah, so we've tried it in a few different ways because we're piloting our executive search process right now. We're trying different things. So we have situations where on the job description, on the job posting, there's the 3 steps. A candidate, if they want to proceed, they have to apply for the role. They have to do the Google form questions. And then the last question on the Google form is the Spark Hire link to complete. So a completed application in our eyes is the application, the Google form questions, and the Spark Hire. That is considered a complete application.
Got it. So it's like automated all the way through then.
All the way
First
through.
few steps. Okay.
That's for our executive level right now.
Sure.
Manager level, we typically take in the candidates that we have. We then narrow it down. We could send a Google form right away, and then based on the Google form answers, send them the video, because again, we do want to honor all the candidates' time and experience in this. So we will then narrow it down and then send the video.
Got it. And what's like the difference between those roles where you would have, more executives go straight to it versus, for more managerial level roles, you're, vetting some people before and then advancing a short list to it?
I would say it's the volume, like the number. Okay. Again, I mentioned we have several hundred applications. Sure. We need to really narrow the field before sharing it with the hiring manager and whatnot. And I have to say, after so let's say 600 candidates, then we can narrow it down to 30 to 40 to present to the hiring manager, to work together to then narrow it down to 10, to then narrow it down to 4, to then narrow it down to the top 2 or 1.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, we're in the beginning of the year here. So what, I know you mentioned, removing bias as one of the goals for you guys. What else is top of mind for you this year?
Well, we're going through a reorg. And so like I mentioned, we do business as Acelero Learning and Shinerly Learning. So we have an initiative internally that we call One Inc., where we're bringing those two together. There's a lot of great minds and brilliant people here. And what some of us are doing at Acelero are different than what some of us are doing at Shine. So we want to bring them together to we could be better together. So there is a new structure, a new org chart proposal to bring us together. And that includes some leadership positions to oversee kind of both parts. So leadership positions designed to support the different functional areas in our goals to grow. I think a big strategy this year is growth and development. That could mean taking on new Head Start programs ourselves. We have 4 delegates right now. We could grow to more delegates, or we can grow to supporting more states with their early childhood programs, more individual companies with their programs as well. So strategy and growth is a huge goal this year.
Sounds like a lot of work. Now, is there a separate TA team for the other org that you need to merge into one, or are you guys right now serving both organizations?
We're all on the same team.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Got it. So is it mostly then there's obviously a lot of moving parts to it, but from a recruiting standpoint, is it do you have to go back to the drawing board on all of your employer branding, all of your comms, everything to align with just this new single brand? Or
well, I think it's we may be going through a rebranding, but the idea is we're still doing business. They are 2 separate companies because we're doing 2 different functions. We're operating the actual Head Start program in Acelero Learning, and then in Shine Early Learning, we're assisting others with their early childhood program, whether that be Head Start or private early childhood provider. So I think we're going to keep those brands, but internally work as one.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So you mentioned earlier, you've been there for 15 years. So you've probably seen a lot of things in your time there. I don't know how big you guys were when you started, but it seems like there's been a lot of growth. So you obviously have a pretty mature hiring process. You've implemented a lot of different strategies. You're dealing with a wide range of roles, a lot of applicants, a lot of hiring managers. But for folks that are watching this later on, and are encountering some of the challenges that you guys face, like, where would you help somebody start? Like, if they're like, okay, I've got a lot of openings, and for some of those roles, I've got a lot of candidates, like, where's the first place I start to start pulling this all together? Because oftentimes what we see is that just ends up dragging the hiring process out for those organizations, and they're kind of left behind in a race for talent. So like, if you were coming in fresh to where you're at now, saw a lot of the challenges you're facing, and there wasn't a lot of infrastructure to support that, what are some of the things you might start with?
Yeah. Well, I would start with a listening tour with hiring managers, with stakeholders, leaders, to see what their priorities are and their goals. What are their goals? So that's one step. And then within the team or within the recruiting function, or if there's not a recruiting function, where are the bottlenecks? Where are the pain points? So if, like you said, this company just has a ton of candidates and they don't know where to start, if you have a ton of candidates, let's work with them, right? So finding out, doing a lot of demos of like tools to be used for screening. So just for our company personally, we decided on Google Form. It's free, it's easy, it's customizable. And it gives the candidate a time to do it on their own when they have time. So send out that screening. There's the Spark Hire platform that we utilize. Develop 3 to 5 questions that are going to narrow down the pool to move those candidates forward. That's for the priority of multiple candidates. That's a good problem to have if you have so many candidates for a lot of roles. So it really is identifying what the pain points are, to find the solutions to those issues.
Great. And if we pivot a little bit to Spark Hire, you guys, are obviously a customer. We've talked about it a couple of times throughout this recording. What are it sounds like you've integrated into multiple areas of your hiring process for different roles. If you had to give like a new Spark Hire customer just starting out some advice on how to get buy-in from candidates, because for most candidates, this is something new to them. Like, what are things that you've done to really, I know you said like your candidates are important, you want to personalize as much as possible. What are some things that you've done to help with that?
That's a good question, because we have had some pushback to say, I don't want to do this. I'd rather talk to somebody in person. Sure. We have indicated that this is a standardized part of the process, and we want to learn more about you so that we can have more meaningful conversations when we do speak. So it's more about learning more from them and about them. So we can have more meaningful conversations.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think oftentimes, like, when this is something that's new for a candidate, they think this is some kind of like replacement of a future step in the hiring process. Like, oh, I'll never get to talk to somebody or something like that. But the reality is, and what we try and communicate to candidates and what we try and coach customers to communicate to candidates, is it's actually a benefit to the candidate, because the reality is, like you said, if you have 300 people applying, without the proper tools and technology to get through that, like, there's going to be a lot of people that just might not make the cut and might never get an opportunity to tell their story, add context to their experience, get in front of a hiring manager, quote unquote, just because there's not enough time.
Right.
And so oftentimes that's what we coach folks on, is this isn't like a replacement for like an eventual in-person, face-to-face type of conversation. It's to help, one, get you in front of that hiring manager and do it a lot faster. And there's a lot of benefits that for a candidate as well, but it's certainly like an educational thing, right?
Yeah.
As are all new things. Tell me about like what other, I know you mentioned Google Forms, Spark Hire, what other technologies are you guys using? Do you guys have an ATS?
We do have an ATS. It's Workday.
Okay.
So Workday, I don't know how to say this. They weren't built as an ATS, right? So sure. They've invested a lot of time and energy into building the recruiting functionality. They just have a lot more to go, but I do appreciate Workday's brainstorming community and the fact that they are taking notes and suggestions for the future. So we do struggle a little bit with the current state Workday recruiting ATS, but we're making the most of it. Like, we do have our it operates very fundamentally,
Yeah.
as an ATS. It's just more of that candidate engagement, CRM. I mean, and there are separate vendors for just CRM, but
Yeah.
I'd love to see more of a pipelining functionality and tagging. I mean, there is tagging, and you could build a talent pool. It's just that measure of engagement and pulling those out.
Got it. And are your hiring managers, I know there's a lot of them, are they interacting in Workday? Are they reviewing Spark Hire interviews? Like, what's their involvement with the technology that you guys have implemented?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we only implemented Workday. We went from Taleo in 2021. It seems like yesterday. So it's like we've only
Yeah.
had it for a little over a year, and it takes for anybody that's implemented a new HRIS or ATS, it takes a lot of change management.
Sure.
So we have hiring managers in there. When a hiring manager is on a requisition, they can see all the candidates. We send them the candidate through Workday. And then they indicate whether or not they're interested, which is great. You can tag notes. So there are some managers that have adopted that and run with it, and they take more accountability for their search process. And then the other managers, stick to email and sending things over email and things like that we have to groom to transition to utilizing Workday as we've designed it.
Yeah. And I know that, I mean, that's a challenge for everybody, especially when you have a lot of hiring managers, is just hurting everybody to use the same methodology, use your structured process, use the tools that you've implemented to help make things more efficient for them. Has there been anything that you found to work really well in getting hiring managers bought into that process? I know you said there's some that you still need to groom a little bit to get out of email and that type of stuff. Like, is there anything you guys have done to really coach them on the why behind using these different tools?
I think, well, we've had change management ambassadors, so it's other hiring managers that buy into this, that we can spread their message and not just say you need to do this. It's getting the buy-in from their colleagues to show them how it can actually benefit everyone. So it's more, so there's that, and then there's also one-on-one coaching. So like you mentioned, we have a lot of hiring managers, but what we found to be most effective just as a partner is to sit down with them, go through their inbox in Workday, which is, if you have Workday, you know what that means, and go through the tasks that they have in Workday, reviewing candidates in Workday so that they can see. So it's really showing them how it could be beneficial. And then you asked me a question too, do you share the Spark Hire video with hiring managers? So yes, we do. And the way we do that, because again, with the and the higher level of, if you're hiring for a manager, then that hiring manager is at a higher level, they may not
Sure.
be in Workday so much. So for those roles, we often create a spreadsheet of the candidates with their resumes, or we upload the resumes into Spark Hire, which is a functionality of that. And so we provide the resume and then the link, and then there's a rating system based on the outcomes of the scorecard. So we've made it very measurable so that the hiring manager can assess each candidate based on the outcomes of the scorecard.
Got it.
And the Spark Hire video is one data point in that process.
Got it. And how do the hiring managers respond to getting the videos?
Very well. They really enjoyed the process. They liked seeing the questions, and then having the questions related to the outcomes was very helpful in determining who they want to see in person, or do the working exercise or the thought exercise, or bring them forward. They really have taken well to the videos.
Good. Well, and especially like if you're doing that intake meeting or that strategy call, like you said at the beginning of the hiring process, and if you can collaborate with them on those questions, that adds so much value for them when all of a sudden they're getting these interviews with the questions being answered that they agreed to. It gives them like all the context that they need in order to make a quicker decision, which is good for everybody, good for you, good for them, good for the organization, and ultimately good for the candidate as well.
Right. Well, I do want to add, in part of our goal to reduce bias, we have stakeholders. So we have a selection committee. So it's not just one person making the
Yep.
decision to hire someone or not hire someone. So we found that that's really critical. So we have a committee, and we have these spreadsheets, and each person gets a separate spreadsheet so they can't see what other people are rating, so that there's no groupthink. We've developed a very measurable, more scientific way to measure candidates to reduce the bias.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's key in any hiring process, regardless of the tools that you're using, is to get more than just one person involved in the decision-making process, because then you're subject to that person's opinions,
right?
Versus, a true evaluation across multiple people that understand objectively what it takes to succeed in that role and what you guys are looking for. So I think there's a lot of benefits of getting multiple people involved at, different stages of the process, and the easier you can make it for them, the better. Right.
Right.
And that's, I think another benefit, for you guys that you can relate to your candidates as well in your hiring process is that, like, we have multiple stakeholders that are contributing to this process. So you're not like going through this process and there's one person that's determining whether or not you're going to work here. Right. I think that's oftentimes like something that candidates complain about is like, oh, I talked to the recruiter, they just didn't like me, so didn't work out. But now, since you have a committee, it's again a more holistic view on the candidate. So I think between your process with like the stages, the tools that you're using to get a full picture or profile of that candidate, and then the process you have on the people side in your organization with the committee and the way you've structured scorecards and not enabling groupthink, those two pieces come together and make for a really effective hiring process. So I'm impressed. I think you guys are killing it. So
thank you.
Congrats.
I appreciate that.
And so, I mean, this has been really, really helpful. I really appreciate your time. I know everybody that's watching this is going to really appreciate your insights. You guys are doing a lot of things with a lot of moving parts, 2 brands, hundreds of roles, thousands of applicants. It's a lot going on. So I definitely appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me. And yeah, just looking forward to continuing to work with you and wishing you guys all the best in 2023.
Great. Thank you so much. I enjoy talking shop. So this is a fun conversation.